Behold, my glorious supporter Liliana asks, you're tasked with reworking all of Warframe PvP, both Conclave and Lunara. Ooh, okay. How do you design them to make them the most fun and engaging? Making them more rewarding at the same time is bonus points. Alright, and there are also some conditions attached to this one. Let me see. A couple of rules. We can't just remove PvP. Okay, well, there goes my first suggestion. And we can't inherently change the nature of PvP. So Lunaro has to be a game with a ball and two goals. Okay, Conclave otherwise has to be shooting each other with warframes and PvE guns, etc. Okay, all right. So I can't just make something totally different. Because I would have suggestions like that. Let's quickly talk about those. Yes, I think that Warframe is a little bit at odds with having PvP. A lot of the game is designed in a way that is ill-suited for player versus player gameplay, and the reason we have PvP despite that is because Warframe is a game that kind of threw all its ideas at a wall to see which ones would stick. So early on, of course, they threw PvP at the wall as an idea that might stick, and it didn't. Decidedly did not, and is probably something that we can just say that didn't work, let's move on. But that is not the way they've chosen to take it, which is fine. My problem with that, and a lot of people's problem with that, is just that if we're not gonna make it better or take it out, it's just sort of a loose part of the game. You know, it does damage to the game in the sense that you hear that you can do X, Y, or Z thing, but it's not actually good. You know what I mean? Like you can do it, but it's you don't want to do it. That doesn't really give the consumer, the player, the audience member, or even just the person in our culture that knows of Warframe, a lot of confidence that something new in Warframe will be good because there are these extant things in the game that are just kind of languishing, right? So I would recommend taking it out, not because I think it's impossible to fix, but because I think at this point the marginal benefit of having it is basically non-existent. Like there might not be much of a cost besides this thing about damaging the player's confidence that the game will be fully fleshed out if they encounter PvP. But I feel like it's just not. There's no payoff for keeping it in. Like you get almost nothing by leaving it in. I guess the way they view it is that if some people are still playing it on private servers or whatever, you might as well provide that. I feel like you could probably provide that a different way with some kind of beta client or something without. Yeah. Anyway, so that's why I would take it out. Not because I think it's impossible to fix, as we'll talk about. I know exactly what I'd like them to do with it, but before I would recommend that, I would have recommended taking it out, and that's why. We can't inherently change the nature of PvP. Yes, okay, this is not one that I would have been directly going for as much as I would consider adding new modes. I think Gambit, the Destiny 2 PvP mode, where it's like PvE, two teams PvE, like kill a boss, and then they can interfere with each other while they're killing those bosses. So it's like a boss race. It's like PvE racing, drift frame, except that you can invade the other team's thing and like muck with their boss fight. This is something I think could work quite well in Warframe. I think it would be a little weird in the sense that the design of the bosses, you'd need to be pretty careful. But as long as it's symmetrical between the two teams, I feel like yeah, I mean, you're gonna easily kill other frames if you invade, but then you're slowing down your team's own kill. So it's interesting, and it does have this interesting way where you could play keep away as well. You're attacking a boss. You have powerful parkour in Warframe, so you have the option to simply evade attack and continue DPSing, which could be a very interesting way to do a boss fight. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure it would work that well, but there are things about Warframe that are well suited to that idea. That's at least a good place to start. Like things that, what is Warframe special for? What about PvP could overlap with those special things about Warframe? Because that's what it's not doing right now. Right now, moving on from this concept of why I would have removed it or changed something or added a game mode to what I would actually do. The problem with Warframe PvP as it is now is that it's not doing anything exciting that is different from normal Warframe gameplay, but it's also not delivering normal Warframe gameplay. So it's not a power fantasy anymore, not really, but it isn't anything successful in place of being that. So it should just be a power fantasy. You could make it more of a boots on the ground, limited parkour. It could be operators without focus abilities. Some people have suggested that. I'm not allowed to do that because we can't change the way PvP works, but you could, that could be a thing. And the reason that that doesn't make sense is because it's already not that. It's already not a power fantasy. We want to make it closer to what Warframe already is rather than this totally new different thing. Why isn't PvP already a massive power fantasy? Well, if you can give about half the frames in the game a little bit of range, they can just one-shot any other player through walls with their fourth ability or whatever. And you would have the epitome of a press 4 to win meta. So we can't just give frames straightforward powers. This is where the problem from PvP probably stemmed. You can't just give us normal modding. So PvP sort of took the approach to blind me so that I can't explain what I would want to change in PvP. Basically just gave us mods that tweak your parkour, your movement, maybe a few little things with energy. There's some interesting energy restoring mods. There are a lot of interesting mods, but they're too weak. They're way too weak. And what we want to do is just buff the hell out of all of those mods. So I think here the mods need to change. You don't want to split the behavior of weapons and stuff any more than already has happened between PvE and PvP. Obviously, some abilities just don't work in PvP. But you don't want to split that any more than is necessary. It's something you can do. Sure, there are places where it's appropriate. Mind control, for example. But for the most part, you want to keep it the same so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. Connecting it to normal gameplay is also good. Having skins as a reward is a start, but we can do better. So again, we're not going to allow power stats too much. It's impossible to balance that. Strength is something that might be okay, and efficiency sort of maybe, and durations probably not, because then you're getting stun duration, and definitely range is just something it's non-negotiable. We cannot give you range in PvP. That's not going to be the thing. So what do we do instead? Well, I think that what we want to do is play up the power fantasy elements that are not currently used by Warframe PvE for PvE balancing purposes. So for example, not more powerful abilities, but more rapidly casting abilities, more frequent ability usage, abilities that interact with each other, sort of trading abilities, and being more like a mage in other types of games where you're really spamming out spells. I think that is a better way to capture the idea of a power fantasy. We can't make your abilities more powerful, so let's let you use them more often instead. Let people specialize with mods that give you way more energy back, or like energy lifesteal. And you could also make some tank ones, so you maybe get a bunch of health and shields boosted, but then you can't run that one that gives you a lot of energy back, so you could use to be a tank or more of a glass cannon or whatever, right? And then you can create roles. You maybe have these be set mods that are mutually exclusive with each other somehow, I don't know, or like a new set of drift mods. And speaking of which, we can connect Lunaro by adding, basically a different set of drift mods, where you have to choose which one you want, and maybe one gives you parkour maneuverability and velocity but makes you run slower, or another one does the opposite, and then there's one that gives you slide but like weaker jumps, and you can choose what style you want, which even allows it to be affecting Lunaro. You can even have your Exilus slot affect your Lunaro play, so that you can choose whether you want to be like a sliding archetype or a bullet jumping archetype or whatever, however you want to play Lunaro. And then you could even have teams. You could have a team composition where you have a goalie that is, I don't know, focusing more on jumps, I guess, and then maybe people that are more aggressive, trying to score points, that are using slide or the sprint speed one. I don't know, but you could create archetypes, right? And that would be interesting. It would probably be easy to tell what people had, too, by seeing what negative they were experiencing. And then you could match up against them, and that could create this interesting bit of buildcraft, not quite buildcraft, but sort of counterpicking or just matching up. The way that you do in actual sports, you'll say, we want our faster player on their faster player, covering them so that they can't run amok and score all the points in the sports ball, It's the same thing. Like, obviously, Lunaro is basically just Poctotalk, so or lacrosse Poctotalk, so I think that's where you need to start changing things. You need to make the mods different. You need to take the mods we have, probably not make new mods. There's already a huge amount of Conclave exclusive mods, and modify them, mostly just massively buff them. None of them make you do any more damage anyway. Here and there, but mostly no. So it's fine to just increase their numbers a lot, and you're going to need to add some different effects, so that there are again, not necessarily archetypes on the level of Warframe PvE buildcraft, where you can build pretty much every frame of the game for multiple totally distinct things. I don't think that's entirely necessary. I think it's more about giving you the ability to specialize a little bit and customize and create something that feels power fantasy without just instantly one-shotting your opponents. And again, I think the biggest thing is like I'm just bummed out about not being able to use powers when I play PvP. I also do think the progression probably has to change. I think it would be nice as a little intro bit to add a tutorial where you get to pick like a class of mods and then you get those. You can buy any of them that you want later through grinding reputation, but you start with a set so that it's not like you're getting more powerful as you play more PvP, which is currently the case. Now, a lot of the mods in PvP, for those of you unfamiliar, which is probably a lot of you, a lot of the mods in PvP are trade-offs. So, for example, there is a cycle of mods for your guns that let you replace one type of damage with another. So, like, you take off some of the impact and turn it into slash or, like, into puncture or whatever. And because Tenno have armor, you mostly want puncture. Puncture is really good. Impact is well-rounded. Slash can be okay in some situations, but especially if you have status, of course. But for the most part, puncture is pretty sweet if people have a lot of health, and then impact is well-rounded. So, yeah, I mean, that puts you in a situation where you can customize your weapons in a way that doesn't add power to them, but in reality, it does. You know what I mean? Like, you're not adding straight-up damage, but when you have been playing Conclave for a while, your loadout is objectively superior to your opponents, so long as you're not just atrocious at buildcraft and are putting on mods that are actively counterproductive. And now when I said, you maybe have an archetype where we're going to make new archetype mods, we'll call them archetype mods, where, this one gives you energy, life, steal. So when you do damage with your abilities, you restore energy. So you can have some ability that's hard to hit with but does a lot of damage, and you can spam it a lot if you keep getting hits, stuff like that. And if your opponent can dodge you, then you get blown out and maybe you lose a lot of energy or something. Yeah, that's what it could be. So you lose all your energy if you miss, but you get like 50% energy lifesteal if you hit. So like you basically get infinite cast until you miss, and then you're dry. It's that kind of extreme effect that sounds OP, but remember, you can't add strength. Like it's Conclave, so you can't just put a bunch of strength mods on. You can't put a bunch of efficiency mods on. You need to get that energy up front as well. It's stuff like that I think would help. And these archetype mods, if you will, are already something that PvP has. Now, I don't remember closely enough because I barely ever touched Conclave at this point, but there are some mods already in Conclave that force you to choose, do you want this effect or do you want this effect? They're not too directly related. I think it would be nice to have a mod type for those. Give them the archetype keyword, and then you can only match with... It's like a reverse set. You're not rewarded for having more. You're not punished for having less, but it's not rewarding you for running more of the set. It's saying you can only run this set. You're limited to this set. And in exchange for that drawback, they're more powerful, And then that way you can't build all the tanky mods and then all the sustaining mods. And when you pick your little starter pack in that tutorial I'm suggesting, you have a full, powerful archetype that you're playing. So you say, I want to play tanks, I want to play mages or whatever, and you can pick that, and you have the full power level of that thing, and it's just like if you want to change later, then you customize, right? And I'm sure there would be some degree of hybrid builds that someone's going to make a good stuff build where you just have like all the mods that are not archetypes that do good stuff, and you have them all in one place, and it's just crazy. And I think that would be fun. It would add some buildcraft. There are already a lot of mod names or mod cards made for PvP. They just don't really do that much, Don't get me wrong, like they are kind of already in this direction. I think that our dear developers do probably know this thing. Like this is probably not a surprise to anybody that worked on Conclave Balance at any point. But I really do think they should be more powerful. Like they should just be pushed. It's clear that that's of the two directions, limiting it to be a more traditional competitive shooter and making it a power fantasy but of a different kind than the one we have in PvE. They're pretty clearly on this side where they're trying to make it into that kind of power fantasy that's different and would work for PvP, but still gives you the feeling of being a badass magical space ninja. Yeah, so that's why I think they should do that. I feel like Lunaro doesn't need that much help. I feel like people have been enjoying Lunaro. I've seen Lunaro content I've enjoyed Lunaro. I think that Lunaro is unpopulated mostly because it is part of PvP. I think that that is a large amount of the effect. And because it is so singular, it's so random, you know, there's not like a collection of games around it. I feel like it languishes where otherwise it could have been more popular. It's worth noting too that Lunaro was a bit of a bid for power in the Rocket League space, and while an interesting idea, I think was probably ill-advised in the long term. So I don't know. I mean, I think Lunaro is sort of okay, and that's not the first place I would go to make changes because I feel like Conclave has a lot more of the game's real estate, but it is doing much less right. Like there is not really anything that Conclave is nailing, whereas Lunaro is ostensibly an interesting game that just like lacks a bit of depth, I would say, and is still really interesting. A lot of people are already having fun with Lunaro, you know, whereas when was the last time you heard someone having fun with Conclave? You know what I mean? Whereas like I can name people that are enjoying current Lunaro, so like, all right, let's leave it alone, you know? I do think that Exilus mod class thing where you could be like a slider or like a jumper would be interesting. That would add a little bit of playing around and personalization, which is something that anyone attracted to Warframe is gonna like. That personalization is an appeal everywhere else in the game, so you want it to be there too. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so that's what you do to PvP. You just need to turn it into a power fantasy of everything other than power stats. You can't buff power stats up too much. That's going to get crazy. Probably at all is not a good idea. And it would be really cool to have PvP be distinct as the game mode where you don't modify your power stats at all. You modify how you use those abilities. And that informs PvE because you get to use the ability at its base level and then compare to that awesome magnitude increase you give it by giving it 280% range or whatever, you know? That's what sounds good to me. I hope that made sense, and I want to thank Liliana once again for their support. I've been Zandy, and I'll see you next time.